I have with me special guest Mr. Robert Terrell, Deputy Director for the B.B. King Museum right here in Indianola, Mississippi. And we're sitting in the historic Club Ebony, which is on a renovation, and Robert has a large part to play in making sure this design is well done. But we're going to talk about the early years of Mr. Terrell's life, having grown up in Hollandale, Mississippi. And we're going to find out a lot of things about not just the town itself, but focus on Robert's upbringing and his family's history and what got you from Hollandale to the places that you've gone and bring you back to Mississippi as the Deputy Director for the B.B. King Museum.
Yeah, I wonder how long you have, because, at my age, there's a lot of years that passed. So there's a lot of things that happened in those years. But I started out in Hollandale, Mississippi, little small town off of Highway 61. They call it the Blues Highway. And in my days, growing up there, it was during the Civil Rights era. So, that's what I had to deal with. My father, Robert Terrell Sr., actually, in his younger days, lived on a plantation. So they did sharecropping with his father, and his father had 12 kids. They all did sharecropping, and all of a sudden my daddy got a letter from the draft board to draft him into the military. Of course, he had never been anywhere, so he didn't really want to go to the military. But he didn't want to stay on the plantation either. So he was given the option from the guy who owned the plantation, who was probably on the draft board anyway, to stay there and work the plantation and not have to go to the military. And of course, my dad was afraid to go to the military, but he definitely didn't want to stay on the plantation. So he decided to go it on to the military. He went to the Navy. And that changed things for me, because him going to the Navy, he went to World War II. And when he got out, he did not go back to the plantation. He actually moved into the town of Hollandale. So as a result, all of his kids were born in Hollandale.
And what number are you in the lineup?
I am actually number 7. It was 13 of us, so it was 6 over me and 6 under me. So I fall right there in the middle.
Wow.
There's a lot of us. You got to remember, back in those days, they encouraged big families because you needed people to work. Unfortunately, I still did the same type of work. I just didn't live on the plantation, But I actually did all of the cotton field work. I did the chopping cotton and the picking cotton and, the trunking the trailers and all that stuff as well.
So how did you find yourself? And this is going on up until your high school years?
Yeah, this is going on through my high school years. I actually didn't graduate until 1976 out of Simmons. I went to Simmons. And for all the early part of my years, man, if I can think all the way back to maybe 5 or 6, I was in the cotton field. I was doing work in the cotton field. I went from being the water boy to the hoe filer to chopping and picking. I did it all, And my father, we moved out of the house that I first remember in downtown Hollandale. You would call it downtown. It was right around the corner from Blue Front. And we moved from there in 1966 and moved into the house that they own now, in what we would call Jonestown. And all the time that I lived in their first house and in the house that they moved to in 66, until I left going to college, I did work in the fields.
And so getting from, which is, this is pretty similar to many stories we hear, in the South and especially in Mississippi about, young people who grow up with maybe not a consciousness of the outside world. But in your life, I find it very interesting that you leave, grow up in a town like that, and then you find ways to maneuver into city lifestyle. So how did you get from Mississippi into the places that you've gone?
Well, in 1977, I believe it was. Well, the first time I went north was actually in 1975. And I remember as a young man, we ended up having a family reunion. Most of my daddy's brothers and sisters, they lived north. So from Kankakee or to Chicago or to Roxford, all up in that area is where my daddy's siblings all moved to. My daddy, on the other hand, and my mother was the two in their family that stayed in Hollandale. Now, my daddy's daddy lived in Hollandale as well. But so when we started having reunions, the family reunion was up north because the majority of the people were north. So my first trip to Chicago or in that area was in 73, going to a reunion. No, 75, I believe it was 75, going to a reunion. And, I connected with so many of my family members because with the majority of the people in Chicago who had Mississippi ties, when it became summertime, they would always send the kids back down to Mississippi because they figured they can get a little bit more culture. It won't be as dangerous, running the streets of Chicago. So I got a chance to spend a lot of times with a lot of my cousins who actually born in Chicago and grew up there, but then they would come back here to Mississippi. Now, me being in Mississippi, I want to get away from Mississippi. I mean, I guess I can feel like those old bluesmen. I mean, I was tired of the cotton field. I was tired of that Delta sun. And it was just time for me to get out of here. I wanted to see something different. My mother actually told me as an adult when I came back to visit that she always prayed that I would get out of Mississippi safe because she really thought that I would get killed, Growing up because of the way things were back in the 60s, the early 60s, and my mouth was a little flip. I guess I just was born a little different. I didn't think that things should be the way they were as far as the powers should shift. You riding out, I'm in the cotton field, and you drive out there and pickup truck with the air conditioner on just to look at me, and you making the money, and I'm out there doing the work.
So you starting to analyze and see things differently. So what was different about you getting to Chicago that started to inspire you to become who you are today?
As a young man in Mississippi, you wouldn't believe it, but I was a musician as well. So I played in a band. When I got to Chicago, quite naturally, I loved music anyway, so I gravitated to the music. So a lot of the people who I ended up being around were people who dealt with music. So I got my first job, and my job was at a fast food restaurant. It's called Jack in the Box Restaurant. I don't know if you ever remember it. I don't even know if they exist anymore now.
No, they're back popular now.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that. But so that was my first job. And I remember telling my mother that I was going to take one semester off. And she was really disappointed because she wanted me to stay in Mississippi Valley and stay in school to get that degree. She always felt like, well, both of my parents did, they always wanted us to go further than they did in school. So it was like they pushed everybody, to continue in school to get that education. And, I just felt like I didn't have the money I wanted to have when I was growing up. There was other things that I needed to do, and I didn't want to put the pressure on my parents. So I left. And once I got there, I got this job. And on the job, the strangest things happened to me because I was still, what they always say, you was green as a pool table and 10 times a square. When I got there, that's what the people used to tell me, right? So I remember one day, and I was working at the restaurant, and it was this guys who came in, and I guess they had been bullying most of the people who worked there. I didn't know. I'm country. I'm country. That's what they call you, country, right? And so the guys came in and they started something, and before I knew it, I springed up on the counter, jumped over on the other side of the counter. Now I'm finna get myself into a fight. But I'm come from Mississippi where they say, knock the chip off your shoulder. It won't be no, And all of a sudden the guy just wailed off and popped me. Bam! And when he hit me, I looked like he hit me. and it was two of them. And I went to town. I mean, I just laid them on them. And the guys took off the running. When they took off the running, they went out and they took bricks and they threw back and broke the windows out of the business. And everybody that worked there who had been being bullied, all of a sudden start, coming around me. It's like, oh my gosh, he ain't scared of these cats. He ain't scared of them. And so that, that's my first encounter with, real city life, because I'd never, I grew up down here in Mississippi. And when I was, everything that I did down here, you could see a fight coming. Nobody just swing on you. And so it was just different for me. But once that happened, then people kind of surrounded me. And they felt like, oh, I can hang out with him because he ain't afraid of these guys, And so there you goes. I ended up being the manager of that place, and my passion is back into the music, so I went right back into the music,
So you going from, a worker to a manager, and you use that as a springboard to get you back out into the music world that you were interested in. You didn't stay as a performing musician. So
No.
what changed?
The crazy part about it is I had there was a guy who was working for me, and he would always go around and he'd be singing. He was a good singer. And people used to always tell him, man, you should be in the business, Then he would say, well, I would be in the business, but the only way I would get in the business is my dad was my manager, and he was calling me his dad. So I felt the responsibility at that point to help him out. And so that's what I did. That really got me back into the music, the music business side rather than the performance side. But I started that. Then of course I got a recording studio that I ended up purchasing, and I started producing groups. And of course doing that, I got a business down on 1825 Michigan. So that was right in Record Row. So it brought me, close to all those guys. And it just, my introduction back into the music world was from the business end rather than from the performing end. And until today, I don't perform. I don't play any instruments. I mean, I'm sure I could do it because once you know it, you know it.
Yeah, just the practice time it takes to do
it's a
it.
practice, man. Yeah. And I don't have time to practice, man. I got too many things to do to practice.
Some musicians don't have time to practice. So
Yes, I agree.
another
And
thing.
it shows off too when they get on the stage.
Well, look, when you find yourself in a place where you're starting to be a producer, manager type person, what was that first possibility, of having a really good act, in your hands? Do you remember what that was like?
Well, I think with most people, especially being new in the business, everything you produce, you thought it was great. It's like everybody's like, oh my gosh, listen to this because it's done. So I think most people, when they produce their first record, they think the record is good. But
Primary influences for a lot of music came out of Chicago.
yeah, well, Gus is one of those guys that he started working for. Oh gosh, what's the guy's name? I'll tell you his name in a minute. That's what happened when you get old. But he started working in the music business when he was like 14, sort of like Reuben Hughes, and he and Reuben ended up being really good friends. But he started working really early in the music business, and they started using him as a promotion person. So he would go into the clubs and deal with the DJs and all that kind of stuff. And before you know it, he was actually a road manager for, the Tyrone Davises and, the Gene Chandlers and all those guys. And he and Marshall from the Charlottes, well, they grew up together, so they was like in the drama bugle. Another one of those guys who actually played as a kid, but then got into the business side. His experiences and his connections in the business. I mean, he worked for Carl Davis for Brunswick, and Carl Davis was the guy who in Chicago they called him Chicago Carl. I mean, he was the ears. He was the man who knew a hit, and just being around all of those guys, all the old Charlites and the Dales and all those guys just kind of gave me a whole new breath of fresh air. And I think the first group that I had that had any type of regional success was a group named Magnum Force. Magnum Force was in those days, everybody had bands. So it wasn't like, you producing something on a keyboard and nothing like that. You had an actual band, and everybody had an instrument. And so you had lead singers and you had people playing. Well, Magnum Force was one of those type of bands that did the same thing. And they ended up signing to Shy Sound, which was Carl Davis's, local label, although he worked for Brunswick. And they had some success. Then, of course, I started using Rick, which is one of the guys in the group who did a lot of the writing, to help me recruit other artists and help produce for those artists. It's just one of those things that just start turning. I mean, it just, it's like when you're in the right place at the right time, everything starts turning for you. And you just never know. But I tell people now, even if you look at BB, it's like when you're supposed to get somewhere, no matter what, you're going to get there if you just follow the spirit. I moved to Chicago. My mother and father didn't want me to go to Chicago. They didn't want me to quit school. But I did. But look where it led me to,
So with you, I mean, evidently your dad had some entrepreneurial type thinking and skills to be able to say that he would manage himself as opposed to staying, involved in sharecropping. But what was your dad like? I mean, in terms of him, because you had to have inspirations coming from somewhere earlier than just getting out of high school and going to Chicago. So what was it like being around your dad, and what was he doing to provide leadership for the community?
Well, a lot of people say, you look at different artists and you say, well, this person is my idol, or Michael Jackson is my idol, or Michael Jordan is my idol. No, Robert Terrell Sr. was my idol. The man was such a wise and well-respected man that you couldn't help but to admire him. Mm-hmm. So not only was it me who admired him and was inspired by him, then everybody in the community was. I mean, everybody knew him, and they called him Skeet, So, I mean, I guess if you want to say, as I got older, I say, well, Skeet, why Skeet? Well, shit, he had 12 kids. So he had 13 kids, so I guess that's the reason why they call him Skeet, you know what I'm saying? But it was a lady named Miss Teal, little old lady who sit on the porch and smoked her pipe, who ran a rooming house. And so my daddy and my uncle, he wasn't my uncle at the time, but he was my daddy's sister's boyfriend. They both came out the military. And I remember Caesar Bell was his name. He was really quite different because my daddy tell me the story about him. He got drunk, and he said, when I came home, I could see his legs, his feet were sticking out, what he said, betwixt the house. So, it's like, so he was laying on the ground in between the houses. And he said, I tell you, Caesar Bell, when he got up, he said, I'm getting out of Mississippi, and I'll never spend another night in Mississippi. And honestly, I don't remember Caesar Bell ever spending another night in Mississippi, even though I remember meeting him. Wow. But I don't remember him. If he came and brought my auntie back with her kids, they'll be there. They'll come in the morning, and, you look at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or something, you see Caesar Bell start looking at that little Timex because he's ready to get out of there. And he would actually leave, and he would never spend another night in Mississippi. So, but my daddy as a young man, after he got out of that situation, the service, he came back and he started running a club called the Harlem Club. There was an old juke joint in Hollandale. At that time, and I lived right there. So it's like I was right down the street from it. It wasn't like I was, 2 blocks away. I was right there. And the Harlem is just right across the street on an angle. Mm-hmm. Big place. And you had everybody playing there. You had all the old guys coming there. There was another guy named Jerry Murray, and he had like an old junkyard, and he would be doing, and he had a lot of guys working for him. It's crazy how all that stuff worked,
So you were already being groomed for for club management and music industry.
I guess I was, but you know, it's the strange part about it is even going to Chicago, I never actually ran a club. You know, I came back to Mississippi and I decided to open something that was like a culture center, and of course I had a club in it, and of course me being connected to all the musicians, such as yourself, then I started having people to come there to perform, and you know, and quite naturally being recruited from my own place to come to the museum as the director of entertainment. Then it just kind of moved me this far. But going back to the old man Skeet, you know, at the time he was doing that place, and he would have many a days, man. I watched him come home at night, and the one thing that I noticed that he was always, and just like BB and all those guys talk about how clean they want to be, my daddy was always sharp as a tack. Shirts always starched and ironed with the creases, you know. So you couldn't help but to admire a person like that. And then he was so genuine and loving and nurturing to all the community. And I remember when he made his turn from being in the clubs and started doing church, and then started doing the dry cleaning.
Oh.
So he switched it up, and he became the from clubs, when you had to respect him, you respected him because you know he knew what he was doing. I mean, and he was just genuine, and going from that, and then going into church saying, I want to raise my kids to have a spiritual side. So he made sure that he took us to church and we learned the spiritual side. And that's, I mean, you can't ask for anything better. When you get a chance to get the balance in your life, you know, as a young man, that's what made me be balanced as an adult.
Your dad was such a nurturing individual.
Well, you know, one of the things that you got to remember in those days, they probably had a lot of illegal whiskey, you know, so they probably had moonshine and stuff out in those clubs. And what my dad had decided to do was, because he said, well, I had to have something to soak up these, you know, this whiskey in these guys. If they drinking all this stuff, I need to have something to soak it up. So he created something he called a flat dog. He was always good at making chili. So he'd make chili, and then he fry bologna and cut it on the side, and then make a bologna sandwich with the chili on it, and they just call it a flat dog. and as a representative, I remember when they did the Blues Mark in Hollandale, I didn't think he knew anything about that, but he called me over. He said, hey, come over here. He said, y'all see this man right here? I said, boy, his daddy was the one that created the flat dog. I'm like, flat dog, ain't that something, you know?
They probably need a flat dog shop. So,
yeah.
was it good though? I mean, he did, I mean,
Oh, yeah,
I
it was
can imagine
good.
what bologna was.
Yeah, I mean,
Bologna
during the time, you know, the bologna was thick. I mean, you didn't get the little thin, you know, stuff that you get nowadays. You know, you can go and get the bologna, and it's, you know, you cut it the way you want to cut it, you know. And so the bologna was thick, and the way he make chili, he was always really, really good at making chili. As a matter of fact, even through my teenage years, you know, when my mother would be going to the doctor or something, and my daddy had to cook something, he was always a master at making. When my daddy started making chili, everybody in the neighborhood like, oh, Mr. Skeet making chili, you know. I mean, he would make chili. He was just really good at making chili. So, you know, that and pinto beans, you know, and I still eat that kind of stuff today. I don't eat the chili because I, you know, got away from the meat, but the beans, I'm a big bean lover.
Still making your dish.
Still making my dish, man. Just don't eat the flat dog, you know.
Well, look, I know we're taking a roundabout turn, and I'm interested because I've heard a lot about Hollandale, and I know you grew up there, and I know there's a strong connection between, you know, what's going on in the Delta and many of the Mississippi towns that we know are around us, and we're experiencing right now at this particular time, you know, a tornado that's torn up Rosedale, which is right down below Hollandale.
Mm-hmm. Rolling Fork.
I meant Rolling Fork, excuse me. I said Rosedale, but Rolling Fork. Mm-hmm. And of course that place is in need of drastic help, and I don't know how long it'll be going, and I know it'll probably be just as long as people spent dealing with Katrina in many ways, because it's torn that town up. But I do know that based on where you've been and the connections that you've made, I noticed that there's some kind of a transition that we're going through, to be able to support and help people in tragedy. We had talked about possibility, with our music connections, to do something to support Rolling Fork, and I hope we'll be able to make that come alive by putting together something that raises some funds for that. But in terms of how you got into the music industry and got to know most of the people that I admire you for, can you at least take us through what you learned, from the Chicago industry side of the music? I think that this could be very beneficial to where we are today in the music world, because a lot of things have changed and nothing, of course, is the same. But during that time when the music industry was starting to make sense, you had groups coming through Chicago who took on the name Shy-Lights. You mentioned Marshall,
Right.
who was involved with them. But what was it like, to get into the lives of the people in the music industry and find your way, as an industry person?
Well, for me, it was kind of tripped out a little bit, because now you have all these strong professionals around you who's been in the business for a long, long time. And so it's like your sounding board. It's like I could use Marshall or use Chuck from the Barksdale or Chuck Barksdale's from the Dales, or use somebody like that to bounce things off of, because they had been in the business for so long. It was just one of those situations where those guys really taught me a lot. And one of the most important things that they taught me was being honest in the business and how to be connected. You have to, and the only way you're going to stay connected is being honest. And that was most important to me, I think, in the business. And that's what they all showed me. It's like nowadays, a lot of the people I know now, I've been knowing for 40 years. People that's, real players in the music business or in the movie business or in whatever business it may be. I have those connections because we were always able to work together and be honest with each other. And that's what those guys taught me. They taught me that part, and it's like, don't use people for things that you don't need them for. Don't wear out your welcome, in other words. Back in the days, that's what people would say. And so I learned that from them. And whenever you come to them, make sure you have something that's real. So if you need some help with a situation, then don't come expecting them to build the ship for you. Come asking them to help you push it, to get it moving. But you got to build it yourself. And that was important to me.
In terms of getting a record off
whatever it is, you know what I'm saying? Because it was just, for me, it was more than just a record. It was about life. You know what I'm saying? So I learned those things, and I use those things in my life every day. Me and you don't do a record together, but we just as close as thieves, because the type of relationship that we have. I'm being honest with you, you being honest with me. If you need something from me and I can do it, I do it, and vice versa. That's just the way it is.
Right. Well, I know you've come through the Mississippi side. You go into Chicago city side, and then you find yourself back in Mississippi. And I know you can name drop. We could talk about a lot of names and people you've been affiliated with over the years, and maybe we could do that at another time. But at this present moment, you are serving as a deputy director for the museum. I knew you as a person running all the operations. At one time you had a title that was centered around running all the operations. You still seem to be running operations. We're sitting here in a historic Club Ebony now that's to get started around 1948, as I said, and then here we are today renovating it under the auspices of the B.B. King Museum, knowing that B.B. bought the club and gave it to the museum, and now you find yourself as the chief person that's managing this renovation. So, how did that come about in terms of the old building as it was standing, knowing it needed renovation, and what was your role in actually putting the information in the minds of the people to do it this way?
Well, it's a strange situation, even with me coming to the museum. I remember I came to town, and of course, I always said, just like a lot of the other people, that I was never coming back to Mississippi. Never, not to live.
Mm-hmm.
But my parents were getting older, and I lost one of my siblings that was here. I thought that was the person that was the glue to the family. And I lost her in 2007. And it just kind of bothered me that I was so far away from my parents, and they were starting to really get ill, and I didn't feel like it was anybody here, even though I had siblings here.
Mm.
I just felt like they couldn't do what I thought needed to be done by my parents. So I found my way back. But then when I came back, I kept saying, gosh, man, I'm bored. I need to do something. And so that's when I came up with the business venture doing the Culture Center, And when I had a partner, we did the Culture Center, and then I started doing a lot of entertainment out of it. And the museum recruited me from that. And honestly, when the museum came to me to talk to me about it, I remember the executive director at the time and the board chairman, and they came to me and they brought me over to Club Ebony, and they say, wow, we need somebody. BB want us to start operating this club, and he want us to do the BB King Homecoming Festival. And we don't have the experience with that. And of course, I'd done a lot of that stuff. I'd done it in Chicago and in Jackson and different places, So I figured I do have the experience. And in my mind, I was saying, yeah, I ain't coming over there, but I'll give you some advice, And I remember my first meeting with them, they brought me over here to Club Ebony. And we were talking. And all the time, in my mind, I kept saying, y'all crazy. I'll tell you what you need to know, and I'll connect you with people. I said, but one thing I could say is I could connect you with Otis Clay or with whoever, and they'll listen to you because I connected you to them. But you have to build a relationship on your own, because they won't do the same thing for you that they'll do for me.
Right.
And so I was saying to myself that I'm really not going to do it. But in my mind, something said, well, if not you, then who? And I just felt that was the Spirit speaking to me. The old Spirit, wise men, telling me that you're the person that need to be here. You have all these experiences that you've had in Chicago. You have all these connections that you have in Chicago, New York, LA, and Atlanta, all over the place. So you're the person that need to be here. Now, the people who was getting me had no clue who I really was. They just saw me doing some things, but they really had no clue what type of connections I had, or who I knew in the business. And I didn't have no reason to tell them, except when it was time to do something, I can always pick up the phone and I can call somebody and they can see it happening and they can like, whoa, how you know that person? Well, how you do that, And they start to realize that I had some very long arms that I could reach a lot of places. And that's my first encounter here with the club. But at the same time, when I walked through, after I made the decision to do, I walked through the club and I saw there were a lot of problems with the club. And I said, well, this club has a lot of history. I remember it growing up. I used to come back to Mississippi and do things with, there was a car dealership who would sponsor things for Mary Shepard in the days, and I was friends with him. Tom Waller, he owned, 4 or 5 car dealerships in Greenville, and we would come over here to different concerts, and he would sponsor. And I was saying, well, the place really has a lot of history, and it need a lot of work. So if it don't get to work, it's going to fade out like a lot of the other places did. And in 2012, that was my first aim to do when I got with this company. I started talking with the city inspector. And I walked him through and I showed him different things that needed to be done with the club, And I say, wait a minute now, don't stop us from opening the club because, BB coming and we need to be ready to do his festival and his Club Ebony event August the 22nd, But I wanted to make sure that you understood or that he understood the things that I saw in the club. And I had done some rehabbing and stuff in Chicago where I changed some 3 flats to condos and all that kind of stuff. So I had some experience dealing with things like that. And so I knew what the place needed. And I just said to him, I don't want you to stop us from opening, but I want you to make note of these things and check on us in a year or check on us in 2 years, to make sure that we're starting to live up to it. And the guy actually went back and told the executive director that, hey, I think this guy trying to get your job. It's like, I don't want his job. But then a friend of mine, came back and told me because he was in that same meeting. But I never said anything to them about me knowing that. And I kept it in my mind what needed to happen. So at that time, they moved me from director of entertainment to director of facilities and earned income and kept entertainment under my belt, which that means it still kept Club Ebony and all its events. And then that person moved on, and I moved up to director of operations from director of facilities and earned income operation. And I still had Club Ebony. It was always Club Ebony. I was real passionate about this place. So when he moved on and when COVID came in, I remember talking with my direct supervisor, Ms. Polk-Lee, Malika. And I said, I know you don't understand and you probably think I'm just blowing smoke, but I'm telling you what's wrong with the place. I said, but come on in. Let me walk you through. Nobody was here. It was just the beginning of COVID. And we walked in the place, and I got my flashlights, and I'm going all up in the back parts. I'm saying, you see this problem here? You see this problem here? And she's like, oh, my gosh, I never knew this. I said, yeah, I've been telling you this. And so she called one of the board members and put him on FaceTime. This is when things got real, because now she believed me. Because that board member says, get out of there. Get out of there now. Get out of there. He said, get out of there, And so at that point, we put in a policy that nobody could come in the club unless it was a second person. Nobody could just come in. And at that point, they got really serious about trying to find the money.
And so with COVID-19, in play, and the club was not functioning anyway, it gave, I guess, ample time to think about exactly what to do with the club.
Exactly what to do and exactly how to get it funded.
And so at this point, I guess this place has been closed down since what?
March of 2020.
Okay.
We've done some things in it. Like here recently, once we got past the major part of the construction, I started bringing tour groups in because I told them, I'm also responsible for all the tours.
But this is just this is recently.
Just recently. Just recently. So I told them all last year I was doing everything at the museum and doing the club event at the museum. And I said, you know what? Next season, you'll be in the club. Because we'd already started the work. So, unfortunately, the work is not totally complete. But it's way better than it used to be. And I'm able to actually bring those tours back into this location and get them into the historical Club Ebony. Get them live music on the stage. Get them the history of the club. A lot of them know about the club. They know what it is. And the ones that don't, I get a chance to share the history with them about this club.
Well, you got, I guess, like opportunity now to not only talk about the history that's already here, but to look at the future of possibilities, for concert entertainment, for this area. And I noticed we would say in our own right that you probably won't ever be able to have, major entertainment like a James Brown was back in that day through that Chitlin Circuit movement, or the B.B. King, who was so gracious to be here when times were, not logical for a city to be able to afford a person like a B.B. King. But he came and did it on his own dime many times. And then, of course, you have a history of blues singers from Howlin' Wolf up to the major artists like the Albert Kings that came through.
And the Ray Charleses.
Yeah. So how do we see that, as a future prospect, for major large-scale entertainment like that? Those are names, that we know today as being superstars.
Well, things are a little bit different now. So during the Chitlin Circuit era, guys couldn't play in those big arenas. So they had no other choice but to play in places like this. I still think the opportunity to get some of those big acts still exists because there are people who would like to get down and touch the people. I remember doing a show in Jackson, and I'm trying to think of the young lady's name, Lila James. And I'm talking about she did a hell of a show on the main stage. So we brought her back that next year because we were doing 5 stages. And the next year, I brought her back in the Downtown Divas Den. That's what we call that particular stage. So it was inside. And it would probably hold about 300-400 people. So I talked to her when she came back, and she said, I talked to her about how good she did last year. You did really wonderful, and we really thought we could get you back. And then she says to me, well, if I did so good, well, why you put me in this little juke joint then, right? That's what she said. It's like she got that California accent. Why you put me in this little juke joint then, And I tell you what, when she started that show, she didn't want to stop that show. Because there was so much energy in that place. So I think there's opportunity for a lot of those people who play in those big arenas. Like BB never lost touch with his fans. Mm-hmm. So he would play in the big arenas. Then he would come back and he would play in places like Club Ebony so he can feel those
the intimacy.
It's totally different, So I think there's an opportunity to still do things like that. I know right before COVID, I had dealt with a friend of mine and we had talked about a major artist, and bringing that major artist to do an unplugged with just the piano. And that would have been amazing, to get somebody like an Alicia Keys or somebody in a place like this, The place has so much history that when you are connected to people and you can get all the way to a person and talk about that history and talk about the influence the Mississippi Delta had on music all over the world. And those people realize that they're standing on the shoulders of those people.
Oh, yeah.
Then they don't mind coming back to give a little bit. It's like they don't have to worry about the money. At some point, they don't mind giving back.
And I think, too, just me personally, looking at what it's like to have the energy of we say small room, 300 to 400 people, no more than 500 people in a room, where the energy level is higher, and you're reaching and touching each person in the room as opposed to 10,000 people that you might not ever even have a glimpse of seeing, especially when the lights are bright and you only can see exactly what you're doing on your own stage. But to be involved in a place like Club Ebony, I think for the future of all musicians, it would behoove anybody who thinks that they are a superstar to try to do a performance in a place where the spirit of the ancestors exist, and especially people like a great B.B. King. You talk about if Howlin' Wolf has been in here and all of the things that we think about, the Muddy Waters,
You think about the big bands, the Louis Jordan and the Count Basie bands, and that's this place,
And I've heard stories about James Brown and his connection. You mentioned Reuben Hughes, but people might not even know that Reuben Hughes was one of the earliest, radio owners, so on his own radio station. And Reuben mentioned stories about how James Brown was intricate, in helping them put the radio station on the map. So those connections where people used to have to sell radio radio ads were everything for musicians,
That's right.
and they couldn't make it if their radio didn't tell people where they were and people were listening to the local stations.
And then at that time, you got to think about the artists knew how important it was for radio. So I remember there was times that Ruben's tower, because everything freeze over here in Mississippi every now and then, and stuff fall apart. I remember the time that his tower went out, and he needed to buy a new tower. And guess who came to him? Tyrone Davis. He said, "I'm gonna put together a show. I'm gonna bring Peggy Scott Adams, me, and they're gonna put the people together, and I'm gonna bring them in, and we're gonna make some money so you can buy that new tower."
Yeah, well,
And that's the way guys work. He said, "Listen, I need your radio station playing my music. So I'm gonna help you to get it done if I need to get it done." And that's what they did.
Well, that's a story I heard Ruben tell about James Brown, saying that you don't have a radio station. I guess they think Ruben was down in the Vicksburg area at the time, the station, and said, "You don't have a station in this area, then I'm gonna spot you the money to start one." So
yeah, it's a little bit different from that, but
so I don't know how that. I mean, I can tell it's a business. It's always a business side.
Oh yeah, it was a business side. It was a little bit different, but that came from a whole different day. When you had, things were different. When people control what they played. And before they had program directors, people controlled what they played. And so all the DJs had the ability to play somebody's record and get them hot. And whenever they came into the area for a show, all the guys came in, they got a little $50 here, a little $50, little thank yous, And at that point, James had been watching Ruben for a long time and gave him a big thank you and gave him the keys to how to get it done. And Ruben followed those steps and opened 2 stations. Well, he was one of the first guys to open a black radio station down in Hattiesburg. He was partnering with a guy, and they opened a station. It was an AM station. But when FM came in, Ruben was able to come up into Greenwood, Mississippi, and he got 2 stations, 50,000 watt station and 25,000 watt station. They powerhouses.
Well, is it true? I don't want to tell the amount of money, but is it true that James Brown spotted him the money to help get started?
James Brown spotted him some money and said, "You take this money and you go buy you some dirt." That's what James Brown said. Go buy you some dirt. So James Brown said, the dirt is going to always be worth something. So that means go buy you some property. And you take this one after you pay for this one and get the next one. And that's exactly what Ruben did. He got up to 10 houses, and then he was able to take the money from the equity out of the houses. And when they called him from D.C., when they got FM, and gave him options of where he wanted to be, and he chose Greenwood, Mississippi. But that's what James did. He gave him the secret to how to do it. And James and a lot of the other guys, because Ruben started in the radio when he was 14. He was young too. He started in radio. He was doing gospel and he was doing shows and all of that stuff. And so he had the same type of connections. I mean, as a matter of fact, the way I met him, to show you how connections work, I met him with Gus Redmond, was the one who introduced me to him.
Oh, okay.
And they had been working together since the 50s. And sometimes, I'd be sitting down having a conversation with Ruben. God bless him. He was such a brilliant guy, always on business. And he would always have a good idea about doing something. But I just remember sitting down with him, and he would always be able to unfold things for you. When you can't see clear, he can clear it up. He had been dealing with so many people over the years. He dealt with shows with Howlin' Wolf and with Big Mama Thornton, you just name it. He had been in it for a long time. So, people like that, they've been very influential to me.
So how do you see marketing as it stands now? We're at a different age, different way people do things. I mean, I know we've got a lot of social media, we got stuff that we do, but do you still think that some of the groundwork that was laid, for connecting the dots in local communities and a club like this, how do you see that playing out, when you're bringing in artists of certain capacities? Like, even if we stayed on the blues side, and brought in blues musicians, sometimes people don't know who these people are.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate that people don't learn the history, and some of that is our fault. So I know you and I have worked for years to make sure we did things like blues and jazz workshops to make sure the kids understood where the music came from and who did it. And if we continue to do that, then we'll continue to grow that young audience of blues lovers, because you can't help but to love blues because you can feel it. So once you're doing something like that, blues and jazz, you can feel it. So I still think there's an opportunity to touch those people. And right now, even like B.B. King Museum, I mean, there's something that we do all the time to tie all the younger people to B.B. They may have never seen B.B., but the good thing about it is, down here, they still play blues on the radio. So a lot of these kids, oh yeah, my mama or my grandmama played B.B. King or played Howlin' Wolf, and you're starting to see, other people in movies, and that's making a difference. And then you're seeing things that's happening now with the younger generation. It's social media, but TikTok. I mean, just think about it. All of a sudden, you see a song that was out in the 50s that's being used in TikTok. And it just kind of, bring that song right back around to that young generation.
Yeah, if it's identified.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, if it's identified.
So there's ways that I think it'll work itself out. I just don't think that, first of all, music will continue to progress. It's always done that. On the other hand, as long as you have people like you and I and places like the B.B. King Museum that's doing all of these workshops and doing all of the legwork to teach the kids, then it'll be around.
Yeah, I often think about, even now, how does one, in the business side of this, this music and the ventures, to say we want to have people come in and paying to come see people in a club like Club Ebony, how do you look at the future, not only of the blues music, but are there any talks, about maybe other styles of music in Club Ebony at this point?
Yeah, I'm sure there has been. I mean, there's always been other styles of music in Club Ebony. I mean, Club Ebony has also been a place where hip-hop performances have been. And the same thing with some of the younger R&B performances, in addition to the blues. And I think it'll always be a place. It's a chilling circuit spot. So when you start talking about chilling circuit, it was more than for just blues. I mean, that was hip-hop chilling circuit. And it's going to always exist. These type of places are places that people can come and cut their teeth on, grow their fan base, and just keep moving. Now, what we have to make sure people understand is, because you can see them on YouTube, it's a big difference in seeing a person on YouTube and seeing them in person. And in order for them to continue to make that music that you love, you need to support the musicians. We have to get people to understand.
Live performances.
Support the live performances,
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. You know. Well, we're still looking at a place that's located in the Mississippi Delta, having a historic name. We're still trying to figure out, connecting the dots, with the people at large. We got a lot of tourists coming in from other countries, who tend to understand more about this Mississippi legacy, and more than what people read about in textbooks. Here maybe people don't read as much as we'd like them to know about, Mississippi history. That's positive too, in a way, because there's so many other things that we have to look. We say positive, but things that are valuable to the future and success of next generation.
Right.
Where there's I guess some logic behind it. But when you look at where you are now, working for the the B.B. King Museum in such a high level capacity, you're making decisions, helping people make decisions, and people are listening to you because you've proven yourself. What do you see in terms of your future? once you decide, maybe I want to retire and I want to do something different, or you, like most of us as musicians and people, we just tend to just hold on to these things that we do because it's such a beautiful part of our lives. We just play music until.
Yeah, but that's the difference. See, I have not been playing music. Okay, so for me, I could see myself really soon in the future being able to get out and enjoy live shows rather than doing live shows. I don't want to be behind the soundboard. I don't want to get on the microphone and introduce nobody. I don't want to be doing contracts and let me teach some young person how to do that, and I transition myself out to being in the audience. And I'd love to be able to get myself an RV and just travel. A lot of people, I've traveled a lot in my days, but there's still a lot of places that I haven't been. A lot of places right here in the U.S. I haven't been. I'm spending the time in Montana. You know what I'm saying? I'm spending the time in Maine. And I've always been a driver, so I like to drive. So it'd be nice for me to just get an RV and just get on the road, and I could just go to different shows and different places. And if I could be a consultant for somebody who needs some advice on how to get something done, I could do that. The one thing I could say about me is when I was in Chicago, I was always the liaison between the young and the old, because I was older than the Twisters and all those rappers, but I was younger than all the Charlites and the Dells and all those cats, the Otis LaVilles and the Otis Clays.
So they saw you as a younger, and the other guys saw you as an older.
Right. So it's like anytime something needed to happen, I can always bring the young people in and get them to listen to me, and I'm listening to the older people. So it's always been that type of thing. So I can still see that happening. Music could always be here. Of course, all of the platforms, will be different, but ain't nothing like sitting in a room where you have live musicians and people. And I think once a person get that first experience, and that's one of the things that we try to do, even with these blues and jazz workshops, bringing kids in and letting them see somebody actually play instruments, not just listen to the radio or listen to YouTube. You see them play an instrument, and that inspire these kids. They want them. They want to get around that, and I think that'll grow that audience.
And I know BB had given himself the education of doing workshops back here in the Delta, and one of the questions he would ask me, while I was managing those workshops, was that, Alfonso, are there any young musicians learning this music?
Yeah. And fortunately, we see some young musicians that's stretching out now. Yeah. The young Kingfishers and the young DKs and these guys are, early 20s, 21, 22, 23. That's been in it for 6-7 years. Right. Kingfish, I remember the first time we had him on the BB King Homecoming Festival, he was 12 with his little group. He was 12 years old. Yeah, now he's 22?
Well, I remember the guys coming over to Mississippi Valley State University over there in Urbana, Mississippi, where BB, Berkeley, where he claims to be born, and on the plantations there. But I remember guys coming out of, some of the incubators there in Clarksdale, who were coming down to showcase their talent, in front of BB King. A lot of young people did that. And sometimes I wonder, besides, where Kingfish is today and many others, if some of those guys are kind of lurking in the shadows and maybe waiting on their turn, But I would say to people who are listening to this podcast too, if you are a young person and have ambition and some clarity of mind, and you hear somebody like a Robert Terrell speaking about his possibility of retiring at some point, somebody's got to take his place. So if there is a person out there, call the BB King Museum and say, I need to speak to Mr. Robert Terrell because I want to know everything he knows. And who knows, you might become or he might take you on as a mentor. Like
If you're serious.
If you're serious.
Yeah, I don't want to waste my time because I don't have a lot of time to waste, but I want to give everything that I got away.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to die with it.
And I feel the same way. I feel
Yeah.
like people who are involved in, in any walk of life, it doesn't have to be music, but sometimes you learn from people when it's less expected.
Mm-hmm.
If you're serious and always searching, sometimes those things fall into your lap,
Right.
as we say.
Yep, that's true.
What do you see as a timeline? We've got the June 1st through 3rd as a grand opening, for Club Ebony in its newest form. And I see you got some work to do looking around the place. You still got some things to get done. So we're now in end of April, and you're talking about the 1st of June. So,
Oh, yeah. The thing about it is that when you look at the things that need to be done, it's minor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could stain the walls in a day. You understand?
Yeah, right.
I mean, certain little things that's left, it's no major. We've done the major work. I mean, all of the infrastructure has been redone. Mm-hmm. So I don't worry about anything that you see that need to be done now. It's all minor. Mm-hmm. I can actually close it down in 2 weeks. Get everything done in 2 weeks. I do have the guys coming and put the exhibit up, and they'll be in on Monday to start it. It's already finished. It ships tomorrow, and I have it finished by the 5th, May the 5th. I mean, it's the green room. Since you've been here, they've been back in the back wailing on the green room, so you heard a little noise, but the green room is pretty close to finished. Now we just got to put some more paint in the 2 washroom areas and put the sinks and the toilets and stuff in, which is minor stuff.
And I'll say to any musician who's ever thought about doing anything on a scale such as this, I hope you get a chance to perform here. I hope a lot of musicians get a chance to perform here. It's laid out, like Robert's talking about, a green room. You got access, large scale doors for load in. It's put together by somebody who understands how a musician would feel if they had to come to a place. So it was already mapped out. I guess I admire you, for being able to put this together so that it's friendly to a musician. I'm looking forward myself to bringing a band in here, and hopefully I'll be playing in some part of this, grand opening.
Well, I'm sure you are. No, hopefully in it. Yeah.
But I like to do that, and I know.
Said I wait. I know y'all ain't come here to sit down on me.